Welcome to the Human Origin Project, where we explore the science of you. To keep up to date, go to our iTunes channel and subscribe, and please leave a review if you enjoyed today's show. Hello and welcome to the show. Today we're going to be discussing the Megafauna Extinction that occurred in North America, right at the period of the Younger Dryas event, when 75% of megafauna living across North America disappeared suddenly. The evidence as to how they disappeared and what really happened, and the many scientific fields that are showing that the Younger Dryas event could have potentially been a catastrophic level extinction that may even rival some of the previous extinctions on our planet. We discuss this in the context of how this relates to human prehistory, and really, why would the agricultural revolution and our history and modern civilization begin after such a tumultuous time? I hope you enjoyed today's episode on the Younger Dryas event extinction and megafauna of North America. Hey Steph, how you going, man?
I'm doing all right. I'm doing good. It's pretty early over here, but I feel a bit better. We started before the sun had come up, but now the sun's risen, so I'm feeling a bit more like myself, which is good. How are you doing?
I'm good. We're gonna have to work out a room to record this where there is natural light, because we're kind of sitting in a illuminated room that very early, and I'm just trying to reposition my life so that I'm cycling back into both not having artificial light before the sun comes up and after the sun, and also darkness is important too, and we're going to go into that later, but anyway, that's a little tidbit there. So we're sitting in a very bright room at the moment, early in the morning. All right, but today we're going to go into a really interesting topic. It's about the mass extinctions of the North American megafauna, and it seems a little bit random in the Human Origin Project, but this is an important line of evidence we've been following, that there's a swathe of researchers looking at this. But it's also somewhat not conventionally discussed that there was this quite a big event that occurred across the planet, and it had to do with the North American ice sheet and what the North American continent looked like at the end of the last ice age.
Yeah, it was a very different place, and that's something that I had no idea about until I started looking into it. And I think understanding that the world was a very different place up until this Younger Dryas event happened 12,000, 14,000 years ago. It really changes your understanding of the Earth and our place on it, because it was almost like starting from scratch again for most of the people on the planet at that time.
And if you're not familiar with what the Younger Dryas period is, we did an earlier show on this, so you can listen to, where we did an overview, and we'll be covering this topic more. I remember probably my first line into looking at this was watching Al Gore's Inconvenient Truth from 2001, and he showed that there was an event where the North American ice cap melted, and it flooded into and froze the Arctic, or the Atlantic, tides that actually direct a lot of the both climate and sea and ocean tidal changes around the world. And I remember seeing that and thinking, wow, that's so important. And he kind of just mentioned it really quickly and then kind of went off as a potential ramification of global warming. If we change, have a melting period like this, things on Earth really shift quickly, and the North American ice sheet melting is one of those events, isn't it?
Yeah, and just getting an understanding that the world was such a different place before the ice melted, and that there are barely any remnants of that former world. I mean, things changed so much after that event. Sea levels rose dramatically. All the megafauna became extinct, which is so important to this conversation, because if we have no at the moment the largest populations of megafauna are in Africa, with giraffes and elephants, and hippopotamus and rhinoceros and all those sorts of animals. But you turn back to around the time of the Younger Dryas, and North America was actually home to the most amount of megafauna. It was the most heavily populated area of megafauna in the entire world, which is a very strange concept. You don't really think about large animals. You don't really associate that with America, but back before the Younger Dryas period, that was home to huge amounts of megafauna that were living there for thousands and thousands of years.
Yeah, and we have to remember that the planet was in full ice age, full glacial ice age, and at the 13,000 to 12,000 year mark, it begins to shift quite quickly, doesn't it? And so this is the shift of the last era into our current one. And on this borderline, you have this huge decimation of these huge mammals, and which we see today in Africa, like you said, elephants and large mammals like that, which humans fit into as well. But yeah, when you look at the details of these animals, and I don't know, you try and picture it, it's a very different place, and the North American landscape would have been very different. It was like a swampy marsh in a way that sea levels were much lower, and this is before during the ice age, when sea levels were low and temperatures were different, and then suddenly there was a big shift.
Yeah, and you can still see the scars littered across North America of how big these shifts were in terms of the geological record. As the ice melted and flooded through the oceans, it had to flow somewhere. So there's these extinct river systems and cataracts and huge destroyed landscapes all across North America where this ice flooded through and filled the oceans. But just to paint a bit of a picture of North America before the megafauna became extinct, there were giant sloths that I think were up to 10 meters tall, giant armadillos, horses, huge camels. They had a few species of elephant, which I didn't know until I started researching this. Giant armadillos. They had an animal, a dire wolf, which was thought to be as big as a horse.
They sound terrifying.
Yeah, I can't. Trying to picture living through this period, just trying to survive would be difficult. Mastodons. There was lots of species of mammoths, American lions, the giant beavers, and that there's these stories of Native American tribes talking about the beavers being so big that if a beaver's dam flooded, it would potentially wipe out a whole village.
Wow, really?
Yeah,
I've never heard.
Because they were like, 20 feet tall.
And they would make a dam and it would just flood a bit. Wow.
Yeah. So you just got to picture this world of just huge animals that, there's a lot of cases of them wanting to attack people. So, back in the day, just trying to get by and live a simple life would have been pretty difficult because you'd have to be constantly looking over your shoulder, trying not to get eaten or attacked by,
I wonder if they hunted. I wonder if they know much on whether they hunted humans as such. I mean, I guess the dire wolf would.
Yeah. I mean, I guess there was a lot more animals.
American lions.
Yeah, for them to eat as well. But I'm sure they got the taste for humans at some point.
And there's some of the biggest land-dwelling mammals ever to really walk that in this period too, wasn't there? I mean, we go back to larger reptiles like dinosaurs, but I mean these are in some cases comparable. It's mind blowing. I mean, like the sloths are huge, and we're talking about larger than a modern day, not times, but larger than a modern day elephant.
Yeah, they were I think 30 feet which is if you think an average human's 6 feet, that's 5 people standing on top of each other's shoulders is one of these things, and there were thousands of them roaming around the continent. And then something happened, which no one can explain, that suddenly saw all of these megafauna just vanish. They all died seemingly in the blink of of an eye, which is I have no idea how to explain it. You know, that one day they were there and then the next day they weren't. I mean, it wasn't as sudden as that, but in many cases, most of these megafauna went extinct just after the Younger Dryas event happened. There were isolated examples of mammoths surviving in different parts of the world in small numbers, but the predominant number of megafauna just vanished from the record.
So the Earth is exiting the last ice age from 19,000 years, and these animals are all living in North America. And then at 12,800 years, there is they basically fall off the radar, don't they?
Yeah, and it's hard to pinpoint exactly when, because the Younger Dryas seems to be a few isolated events and sort of a few thousand years of intense global change. But when all that sort of settled, and the temperature and the Earth stabilized, there's no more megafauna in North America. They've even found evidence all across the continent in North America of this black mat layer, which I think we went into in our Younger Dryas podcast. But it's just this layer of black soot, and they think it was caused by just soggy, like hundreds of years of soggy, wet ground that sort of decomposed and rotted, and then the sediment layer was built on top of that. But everywhere that they've excavated, there's evidence for these megafauna bones below this black mat layer. All sorts of megafauna, but then above the megafauna, they haven't found any bones
above the black mat.
Yeah, so it's sort of like capping off this extinction event.
And this was so within the geological records and the the fossils they dig up, there's basically, and so you can begin to date all to this period, and we don't see them anymore. And as you say, there were isolated instances of, because one of the most well-known is the woolly mammoth, right? So that's there were many woolly mammoths in North America, weren't there? And they're these huge mammals. But so some of the woolly mammoths lived in Siberia for a bit longer, so they seem to have isolated pockets still survived.
Yeah, it seems like North America was ground zero for these events because the ice cap was just above it. So when these changes happened, all the water sort of flooded through, and it's like that was kind of like the epicenter of this disaster or whatever it was. But yeah, the mammoths are interesting because there's been a lot of people trying to work out what exactly happened to them, because there's been so many instances of these mammoths being found with really disfigured bones and smashed up hip bone. Like, you think of a mammoth is something like 5 tons of weight, and they found these skeletons of these mammoths where their feet were still in the ground and their bodies had been snapped back clean. The evidence for their for their legs to be broken, for their hips to be broken, their tusks to be clean snapped off. It's
they're large kind of mass grave sites too, aren't there? And even flash freezing instances where they find what they were eating basically undigested in their mouth and digestive system, which means they didn't get a chance to work through that. So it's like it tells about the conditions that they died in, and there's a lot of this, isn't there? It's
and it's not just so you think it was this. I mean, one part of it, the event, is these insane the insane power that seems to have hit the Earth with these bones and these destroyed carcasses and things. But then on the other side, there's the climate factor, where these huge mammals were flash frozen all the way through, up to the point of undigested food in their stomachs. And I think even there's stories of finding these mammoths and old hunters feeding the meat to their dogs because it was still edible, because it was still so fresh after being frozen for 10,000 plus years.
It's interesting. It's an interesting, it's kind of like a murder scene too. We talked about this a little bit in the Younger Dryas, that it seems like piecing together a story of something that happened that was, potentially quite harrowing. Well, definitely harrowing for the poor megafauna that used to walk on the earth. But the numbers are amazing, isn't it? It goes, it's quite mind-boggling to the extent of how, the amount of species that disappeared at this Younger Dryas boundary.
I think when Charles Darwin was going through the Americas, he had this really long, eloquent quote about, what caused these events. And it was something like the entire framework of the globe must have been shaken to destroy for so many megafauna, for so many species to go extinct. It was like, he saw evidence of it, not just in North America, but in the southern end of Patagonia, all through Brazil, in Peru. And he couldn't explain it, and we still can't explain it. But it's the more evidence that's coming forward, it seems to paint this really catastrophic picture.
There are different theories to it too, aren't there, as well? Because there are other megafaunal extinctions. There's the one in Australia from around 50,000, South America, as you said, around 13,000. So the general consensus is that this was a gradual process. But as Darwin was alluding to, there is a lot of evidence to suggest, maybe it was sudden. And as you say, the Younger Dryas period, everything that we've uncovered to this point is suggesting something quite sudden happened and also quite violent. Yeah,
and that's part of our way of thinking at the moment in terms of science and geology, especially. It's that everything happens very slowly, and this is it was seen as this period was just a slow, gradual process, because we're looking at it through the framework of this gradualistic ideology that's kind of crept into science. But it sort of reminds me of the other extinction events that we've kind of talked about on the Human Origin projects before. This event would be classed as a mass extinction event, but it's not really understood that way yet, because we're still piecing it all together.
75% of all megafauna on the planet, and 35 genera, 120 species, 19 species of birds. If birds are affected, obviously if ecosystems are imbalanced, it's unbelievable, isn't it? And
50% of all the animals above 32 kilos will disappear at that Younger Dryas event, during that Younger Dryas event. And every species above 1,000 kilograms in North America disappeared.
Just gone. Yeah.
And it wasn't just animal. Like we always think of mass extinctions tied to animals, but there were human populations at this time on the planet. I think it was like the estimates are about 5 million people living in North America at that time, and there's countless examples of campsites being abruptly abandoned at that site. Evidence of huge population declines in North America and South America and other parts of the world
that have been mines that have been populated for generations. So we're extracting certain stones and gems just completely.
And they find these abandoned quarry sites with their tool. It's as if something happened so quickly that they just dropped their tools and left. So if you isolate these things, they don't seem too strange. But when you start seeing that they're all sort of tied in together and tied into this time period, it's a bit of a grim picture.
Yeah, it's grim, but it's important to know. I think with these kind of things, for me, I just want to know, right? So it is grim, but it's important to know actually what happened. We can't kid ourselves with, I don't want to kind of have the wool pulled over my eyes and, just to think that everything was hunky-dory, all through history. Potentially avoiding these kind of, events or points in history might be understanding them. And science has really moved forward in a way to collate a lot of different fields. There's a lot of data too. It's so much data. But really when you look at, for instance, digging up woolly mammoth fossils and everything. That's a lot of work, and it takes decades and decades and decades. And we're at the point now where we've amassed enough data to start thinking about it. But generally, the standard, there are many theories put together, which is the scientific process. But so the most accepted theory is the idea of overhunting, isn't it?
Yeah, the idea of that humans were responsible for these megafauna extinctions, which would make sense if it was on a smaller scale, you could believe it. But they're talking about in North America, the population of mammoths alone being over 5 million, and at that time there was only 5 million people. So it's like that's everyone.
It's one mammoth a person.
Yeah, and these mammoths they wouldn't have been friendly. And they're so big. If you look at pictures of them online, they're bigger than elephants, and they've got tusks twice as long. They're huge. Like trying to hunt those things with a spear, even if you've got 20 people, I don't think it's. I mean, I think there's a few tribes in Africa who used to hunt elephants, and even that took them 20 tribesmen, and it was only really ceremonial. It wasn't because it was so insanely difficult. It was just stupid. And
there's not a lot of evidence to show that they really had the means, capabilities, or even desire. The other thing too is you think about the environment. Then is that there's so many other species of that you can go and hunt to feed on. A woolly mammoth feels like the last kind of thing. Maybe not the last, but on the high difficult rating.
And if you're hunting a mammoth, you kill one mammoth, that's tons and tons of meat. It's just like it doesn't really add up that you would need to hunt so many mammoths and so quickly that they go extinct. Like it makes sense that one or two here or there or a few isolated incidents, but just all of them gone that quickly. And I think there's the main culture that was in North America at the time were the Clovis, known as the Clovis culture, and their predominant diet was not mammoth. It was turtle and other berries and things like that.
Yeah, they know that from the studies have shown that, haven't they?
Yeah,
and the numbers themselves. So it's estimated up to, was it 12 million?
Yeah,
mammoths
I think
across
so.
North America, which is just staggering. How is 4 to 5 million people, and we probably don't have solid numbers on the human population, but you can assume to a certain extent.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that mammoth population was global or
it might have been global.
Yeah, but there were so many. So even now today in Siberia, as the permafrost is melting naturally, they're finding these huge deposits of mammoths that were frozen that are now becoming available for people to take. And there's this really big ivory trade that's reborn, where they're selling these mammoth tusks, which are still in perfect condition because they were frozen so quickly, and they've been frozen for 12,000 years.
So they're finding like tons and tons of mammoth
thousands and
in
thousands.
Siberia.
Yeah, and
wow.
I don't think we talked about it before, but there are all these instances of these mammoths in North America that they found where their tusks have been obliterated, or it's like they've been shot with a shotgun, and there's bits of rock and bits of soot and ash that have been burnt into the tusks themselves, which would have required insane amounts of force.
So this goes into other ideas, doesn't it? And so there are other theories to try and explain this mega extinction, and all of this evidence. So obviously human intervention could have been a factor, but there are other theories too. So and it's important in the scientific process to explore them. And so, as you said, there's a lot of instances where a mammoth is sitting with its feet and its body's been ripped off, which you can imagine the force required to do that. But then, so it has come about that potentially there was a Younger Dryas event or an impact or maybe some kind of solar event that could have potentially. It would have had to have been pretty significant to knock off so many So many megafauna. And really, that, as you said, there is a body of evidence which isn't accepted yet, but it keeps mounting. So it's an interesting picture that we're seeing. And this, as always, we always have to follow the evidence. But the black mat layer, doesn't suggest isn't conclusive of a comet hit, but it does show that there was, changes in environment, and it dates exactly to that 12,800 years. And the megafauna of North America, all the mammoths, it sits below that level, doesn't it? And that it's very similar to the dinosaurs in a way, where they saw that there was a platinum-rich layer that ended up being the meteor that hit in the Yucatan.
Yeah, and an interesting thing about that is that they've found a platinum-rich layer in the sediment dating to the Younger Dryas period.
It's platinum or iridium? It's one of them, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, well, there's iridium and there's platinum. There's like platinum group metals, which usually, I think when the Earth forms, they are all drawn to the core because they're so heavy. So when they're not at the core, it sort of raises questions as to them having to have been placed there from outside.
Yeah, they don't come from any terrestrial.
Yeah. And another thing with the extinction event that we've been talking about is no one can explain how the ice melted so quickly across North America. And so one theory that, because scientists that have been looking at it can't find any evidence, any terrestrial evidence, anything that would happen on the Earth to cause such a quick and such a large amount of ice to melt. So no natural disasters, no volcano would be big enough to melt that amount of ice, which was 2 miles thick in some...
2 miles thick, sitting over most of the northern part of the United States of America and covering Canada.
And Canada, yeah.
That is mind-boggling, the amount. What's the volume of ice?
I think that was 6 million cubic miles of ice.
Cubic miles, yeah. Wow.
Which is... Oh, no, or maybe it was 10 million cubic miles. It was... Whatever it was, there was 4 more million cubic miles than there is today. And no one can explain how it melted so quickly. Which would give more credence to the idea of an impact or something from outer space or from something that is yet to be identified that could have helped cause these events, which would also explain why these poor mammoths were so dismembered and disfigured.
And it's basically like from Portland, draw a line from Portland across to New York or something like that, and imagine 2 miles up that there's ice sitting across that line right up through Canada. It's unbelievable. And yeah, there is no explanation as to how that ice disappeared, and it does provide circumstantial evidence as to potentially did that energy to break that ice, to get rid of that ice. And it does take my mind back to that inconvenient truth, seeing that Atlantic current being broken via the melting of the North American ice cap. Was there an event there? And that would, is the megafauna extinction, all of the evidence you see of potentially a violent event, the number of species that went missing, 12 million mammals across the planet, at roughly a ton, it's or more, is unbelievable. And so, yeah, to me, it's definitely painting the picture of something that suggests it could. But there are other theories to this as well, and climate change is one. But the Greenland ice cores really do paint that quite vividly, don't they? That there is climate change, but I don't think it's in the climate change that we kind of really talk about today.
And if it was climate change, if it was a temperature change that caused the melting of the ice, it would have taken thousands of years longer than it did. Even though the climate change that happened during the Younger Dryas period was significant in terms of our context, it wasn't large enough to melt all the ice and to cause all these changes so quickly. It should have been a very gradual process if it was purely temperature change.
Because in those Greenland ice cores, it was a 10 to 15 degree drop, wasn't it?
Which is, yeah. I mean, we're talking about a few degrees now, which is going to, completely change the whole fabric of the entire world, with some cultures having to abandon places they've lived because of sea level rise, species going extinct, coral reefs dying out. That's only 1 or 2 degrees. Imagine 10 degrees within a lifetime.
And there are scientists talking about climate change as a mode for megafauna extinction. You have to remember too that temperature really is it's a result of other factors. So, for instance, we attribute modern climate change to release of carbon dioxide. But so, what if we read those temperature changes in the Iceland cores like those scientists did? You do have to wonder what caused that. And so, for such a big fluctuation, it's just a reading on what's happening. And so, instead of saying it just seems to me that there is something missing in that picture of just saying that climate change caused such a huge event across the planet. Of course it did, but there has to be another part of the picture.
Yeah, and I think learning about these mass extinction events and the prehistoric climate change and all these different factors going in, there are so many dynamic factors that go into these events. It's really hard to isolate. I mean, you can talk about one, but you talk about one, you miss another 5 or 10. So I think it's really important to try and. That's why I've been so interested in this mass extinction topic, because it's you're looking at one part of a huge picture, and once you can understand that part, the rest of the picture makes a bit more sense, to me anyway.
Well, completely as well. And you mentioned Darwin before, but this does go towards an evolutionary discussion as well, because all life on Earth as it exists today is dependent on previous iterations of life. Either we see it as evolving too, but really there are also clearing out certain life forms in order for others to come. And the dinosaurs is a great example of that. It took a long time for us to really admit the dinosaurs was a catastrophic event, and really work that out as to what caused this extinction. And this is 65 million years ago, and there are a number of extinctions that happened over our history, but none are as close to home as this Younger Dryas one, right? And it's not discussed in that kind of context where this thing that happened 12,000 years ago preempted human civilization. So we rise directly after, and we don't see that in an evolutionary sense. But what was that? What caused that clearance factor, and what were the details that really caused us to arise? It really makes me think about that. How our prehistory is intimately linked to the planet, but it also goes into evolution. We see it as a gradual process, but we know now that there have been a number of these. It's 5 main extinctions, isn't there? And Stephen Gould talked about this in his. He was a big advocate for the idea of mass extinctions and punctuated evolution, where we see clear points that delineate between sentences as they would, or periods of time. And the megafauna leaving, helped us to become who we are.
I think as well, yeah. You think of mass extinction events as, the potentially shifting or taking out the top few predators in an environment, which is exactly what happened 12,000 years ago. And that's why I feel like this is so important, because it was so fundamental in our society developing, in our culture rising, and it wasn't until that point that the climate on Earth stabilized, and we could because civilization is very heavily tied into climate. I mean, you even look back to the Dark Ages, when it was literally there was months of darkness across the UK. There's even evidence for almost the entire population of Scotland having to leave Scotland because they couldn't live there anymore.
They're pretty much doing that now, aren't they?
but yeah, it's crazy to think that, how how connected we are to the climate on Earth. And if, we can't imagine it because it hasn't happened for so long, but if the sun, if there was, say there was a volcano eruption and huge amounts of soot were thrown into the air and we wouldn't see the sun for months. I can't remember what year it was, but there was a year I think it was in the 1800s, they call it the year without the summer in America. And there was a volcano eruption, and that exact thing happened. There was an entire year or 18 months with no sunshine, and it would completely destroy the progress that we'd made up until this point. You'd almost have to start again because food, you wouldn't be able to grow food, you wouldn't be able to sustain life without the sun.
Yeah, the North American Megafauna Extinction and the Younger Dryas event I think it should make us think about these things. That's really what, the purpose of this episode is about, is to get us, stoke the fires of understanding. Really, we just want to understand what really happened in history, and extinctions are a part of that. This is a big extinction that happened very, very, almost instantaneously to the rise of modern civilization. And when you put it in the perspective of life on Earth, maybe we should put it in the great extinctions, because humans have changed the Earth since then. So for me, I think we should really understand that.
And you always think of mass extinctions as happening millions of years ago, like things that used to happen to the Earth, but now that doesn't really affect us. But
geologically, this is a blink of an eye ago. Yeah.
12. Yeah, it's insane.
Yeah. But overall, we're going to be covering this topic more. The North American megafauna is a mystery. It's a very big murder mystery. Maybe not murder mystery, but but it's a very interesting one at that, and it's intriguing to trace back what these amazing animals were doing on the planet, and trying to find out what happened. So we'll be covering this topic more.
Yeah, and if there's any other subjects or anything that we've missed to do with the megafauna, please write to us at thehumanioriginproject.com, and let us know your thoughts and let us know other avenues you'd like us to explore or talk about.
All right, good show. I think next week we're going to maybe be talking about Halloween. Let's go with that.
Yeah, where'd that come from?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, let's talk about Halloween.
Let's talk about Halloween.
Sounds good.
All right, we'll see you guys next week.
See ya.
Thank you for listening to today's show. For more information, you can read the full transcript, articles, and discussion on our website, humanoriginproject.com. You can visit us on social media at Human Origin Project on Facebook and The Human Origin Project on Instagram. Follow us on Twitter or join the forum boards and email list to keep up to date with all the new information. And if you enjoyed today's show, please subscribe on iTunes and leave a review, because it helps others to find this information and helps us to bring you the topics you want to discuss and hear about. Until next week, I hope your life is filled with happiness, healthiness, and harmony.